Last time we talked about social constructivism as a general approach. Today, or right now, we want to get into a little bit more detail about what it means as international relations theory. So let's just start with three questions, right? One of which I've already referred to. Why do states use chemical weapons so rarely? Second question, why did the Cold War end? Third question, why does the U.S. see North Korea's nuclear weapons as dangerous but not France's? France has a lot more nuclear weapons than North Korea does. Here's three answers. One is, well, there are norms against using chemical weapons. Second, that's the first question about chemical weapons. As far as the end of the Cold War, the simple argument is that the Soviet Union redefined its interests, basically saying this Cold War is doing nothing for us, it's costing us a lot of money, it's dangerous, it's just not in our interest to do this anymore. So change in interest. And the answer to the third question, why North Korea's weapons are seen as dangerous but France's aren't, has to do with identities, right? North Korea is an enemy and France is a friend. So the central constructivist argument then is that really important questions like these ones can't be answered by standard theories, right? We need these categories about social construction, right? Ideas, such as interests, norms, and identities. Right? We've got to have social construction answers these things, not the other theories we've been talking about. So there's a very famous article on this topic that was really one of the path-breaking articles in this field called "Anarchy is What States Make of It." And that's essentially the argument in Alexander Wendt's article. The idea being this. We know from realism and liberalism that anarchy can lead you into a really nasty security dilemma, like the realists say, but it can also sometimes lead you towards cooperation, like the liberals say. So if it can lead to either of these effects, Wendt argues, then neither realism nor liberalism is doing you a ton of good, right? The big question is, what determines whether the security dilemma or similar things get solved or don't get solved? And the answer, he says, has to have to do with social construction, right? With this question of identities. Are the two countries involved enemies or friends? If they're friends, they probably find a way to solve the security dilemma, or maybe don't even see a security dilemma in the first place. Do they have shared norms or common norms, or are they arguing about norms? When you have shared norms, such as we don't cheat, it's easier to reach an agreement and to not worry so much about being cheated, right? And to go back to the prisoner's dilemma, right? You think of the famous examples of organized crime gangs. When their people get arrested, they have these incredibly strong norms that say you don't rat out your fellow criminal. And those things matter. And then there's this question of shared versus competing identities. So think, for example, about the European Union. The European Union has so much cooperation going on that it's almost hard to say whether it still is 20-something different states or whether it's one state. And that has a lot to do with identity. The Europeans increasingly have seen themselves as Europe and as Europeans rather than as Germans, French, and so on. In the famous case of British, right, the British clearly decided they weren't European anymore. Or didn't really see themselves as having that much in common, and so they bolted the European Union. The point being that when identities are shared, things become possible that weren't possible before, and when identities are not shared, some things like the European Union become harder to do. Another way of thinking about the difference between constructivism and these other arguments we've been talking about is from a constructivist perspective. Realism and liberalism and economic structuralism are all materialist in the sense that they say that the things that matter are material, right? For realism, it's mostly rockets and bombs, right? It's military power, the power to destroy. And to a lesser extent, it's economic power. For economic structuralism, it's wealth, it's capital, it's money, factories, and so on. For liberalism, it's a mix. But in all of these cases, right, this clear sense of material interest drives all of these very different approaches. Constructivism rejects all of that and says, no, it's these shared ideas that are not material. They exist only in our heads and in our mutual understanding that that's what's really important. So I'll finish with a question. Yeah, it's probably too early maybe for you to answer, but at least you should start thinking about in what areas or what kinds of problems do you see constructivist arguments as being most valuable?